Hello and welcome to Rolling with Two. I'm Will, and with me as always is the person who looks at the camera and says cheese.
Sarah.
And today we're doing a two-player perspective and accessibility for Fromage. Now if you're curious about our opinion, check out our other video, Rolling with Reviews, Fromage. Sarah, tell us a bit about this French game.
All right, Fromage is a simultaneous worker placement game where players place workers to make cheese and gather resources from the quadrant of the board facing them. Once all players have placed their workers, the board rotates, aging any cheeses that were made and presenting each player with a new quadrant to place workers into. Score prestige points by selling cheese to the 4 locations and by efficiently managing and upgrading your creamery. The player with the most prestige points at the end of the game wins. All right, Will, how does game change for 2 players?
So there is no bot. And every player count will have a different setup because there will be inserts that will go into the dual layer boards in the center that are associated with the player counts.
Yes.
And those will essentially give you markings of whether or not spaces are even open for you.
Right, so with fewer players, there are fewer open spots for you to place your workers. So it reduces the board space without having to change the board.
Right.
So very nice. And then also at 2 players, they do recommend you should sit across from each other. But if you don't, because like we don't, because I need to help Will with his boards, use quadrants that are opposite each other. So basically, if you were looking straight on at it, the person on the left would use the left quadrant and the person on the right would use the right quadrant rather than the top and bottom.
Yeah, the only problem with that is it becomes a little bit harder to see because one of the whole design elements is that once your workers are facing you, that's when you retrieve them, which is why it works best if you're sitting directly across.
So recommend that if you're able to.
Yes.
So issues at a 2-player count is the map, which I can never pronounce.
Villes?
Villes.
Or villas?
V-I-L-L-E-S. I don't know how to speak.
Villes!
Villes. Anyways, like a lot of area control or area majority, it's not great at 2 players. And even though they've reduced the spots here, it's not enough because it's really easy then to make points, but then it's also really easy to deny points.
Yeah, it's just not the most dynamic of these, what I'd call scoring rubrics.
Yeah.
Because these quadrants aren't necessarily games, they're just ways to score because it's easy to put out cheese.
Right.
It's really easy to put out cheese. But it's what you want to get out of them because the game actually is all about the timing of your workers more than what cheese you can actually make.
Right. I've heard people refer to each quadrant as like a mini game because you are trying to do the best at, like you said, whatever the scoring is for that quadrant.
And the Villes is the closest to a mini game, and it's also the weakest of all the
well, for 2 players at least.
Yes.
But that's the only issue we found at 2 players. And what it does well at 2 players, well, nothing like especially great. I mean, it's because it's so well scaled and balanced for all player counts. This game is going to shine probably at all player counts. I think just some people might like it at the higher player counts so that map quadrant is more dynamic.
Right.
All right, moving on to accessibility. So unfortunately, as much as they tried, rotating the board is still challenging. We have the deluxe version. I probably should have reinforced that at the beginning. Basically, we have a
neoprene mat.
Thank you, neoprene mat that is supposed to help making turning it easier, but their center support structure is not quite built right. They recommended on the Kickstarter to maybe cut some of the foam down. What I found is if you press down in the middle and rotate the board, it works well. But just grabbing an edge and trying to rotate it, it pops right off that center because it's not a locking like rivet or anything, because you have to be able to take it apart, 1 for the variability setup and 2 to put it back in the box.
Yeah, so this can lead to, if you're physically challenged in terms of mobility, just trying to navigate this board and trying to rotate it for yourself because it happens after every turn. You need to give the board a turn.
So this board is going to rotate a lot during the game. Don't know how many times because it's dependent on one person getting rid of all their cheese tokens.
Yeah, it's player driven, so.
The aging quality, so the quality of the cheese, which is generally a color, they do use a pattern, but it's going to be a different pattern for each quadrant. So it's really easy to even see it. But they do have a chart in the middle of the rules or wherever it talks about it that identifies. So the fromagerie has different colored shelves. That's probably the worst for vision accessibility, but they are in order.
Yeah, gold, silver, bronze.
Right. And then the Vils, the map, these have different sizes. So the larger the size of the cheese round, the more valuable it is.
Yeah, the longer aged it is.
Yeah. The festival tents will have different patterns. And then the bistro plates will have different patterns. And again, they're all referenced in the rules so you can learn what they are.
Yeah, and it's good to note that because we almost missed it on the festival.
Yes.
You're like, how do I tell which one age it is? And then you notice like, oh, the tents.
Tents. It just wasn't what I was looking for, but I don't know what I was looking for. So it's because they don't use the same pattern for each of the things, but I can understand why, because they're different things.
Yeah,
plates.
there's also 3 different cheese types.
Right.
There's the blue cheese, the white cheese, and the yellow
Yeah,
cheese.
and thankfully that's also referenced in the rules, and that's consistent. So everywhere you will see yellow cheese, it has the same spotted pattern. The white cheese has this silver swirly thing, and blue has a different splotchy kind of pattern. It's different than the round dots of the yellow cheese. The good news is those were the only issues we could really find accessibility, because what it does well is like pretty much everything else. They did good color choices for the player pieces. You've got white, black, orange, and blue. Now, orange might be the only thing I probably would have recommended to do differently just because there's orange cheese as well. I think it's supposed to be more red, but it turned out orange to me.
Yeah.
But if you have black and white, those are always the best colorblind.
Highest contrast.
Yeah, highest contrast. These are dual layer boards, so the pieces won't fall out. Not the player boards, but they got enough. The player boards are actually larger than they need to be.
Yeah.
So you've got plenty
They
of room.
utilize the space very well for the player boards.
Unique icons everywhere. I never got confused as to what was what. Now, learning the iconography on the square tiles that go on the top row.
Yeah, your building spaces.
Your building spaces. I was very confused at first how I was going to look up what those do. It's on the back of each tile in plain English text.
Yeah,
In
fact, I think you were a little obsessed. Like, why didn't they think about doing anything in the rules about this? And when she goes online, it's like, oh, I'm supposed to turn them over.
And I was like, wow, that was a user problem.
That makes sense.
Maybe they could have put something in the rules that says, see, for understanding how each tile works, look at the backside. I mean, maybe for...
But when in doubt,
yes,
look at all angles.
That's a good point. So it's in plain text on the back, so once we got that down, there were no questions on the iconography.
Almost too accessible, really.
There's the shaped meeples for your resources, the animals, the buildings, and the fruit. The fun thing is there's 3 different for each one, but it absolutely does not matter.
No.
That's just a funsy. It's not just cows. There's goats and sheep. I think it was goats and
sheep, cows.
Cows, yeah. And 3 different types of buildings. And I'm not sure.
Basically, if you can milk it, they threw it in there.
Yep. So for our deluxe version here, there were 2 trays for the components. And the great thing about that is then you can have one on one end of the table and one on the other end of the table and split things up evenly.
I'm going to need that if I'm sitting opposite you.
Yes. They did a really great job with having setup variability, and it's not cumbersome. It's very easy. Each of those inserts, there's 2 sides, so you can just do side 1 or 2, and it changes things up. You can do the tiles, and there's a drafting mechanism so that you can choose them, and you can either use the board ones or those. So there's a lot of different ways.
How the quadrants relate to each other, where the resources are. There's a square board that can even be flipped over.
Yeah, and rotated. So there's a lot of ways to make this different each time you play, but it's all very easy.
Yeah.
There's other games that are much more, like the most complex thing is probably drafting those tiles, but it's still not complex.
And it's pretty neat because after you gain 4 of your drafted tiles, you're not forced to play with them. You can choose to keep any of the 4 and use them, or you can discard them and use the printed stuff on your player board.
Oh,
and you can choose which ones get covered up.
And the player boards are unique. Each player board has different printed abilities.
Yes.
So there's normal asymmetry in even the base game. So if you just want to do something different, get a different player board.
Yeah.
And the rules are comprehensive. Yes, even though I was looking for information about the tiles, everything is covered in the rules, and it's just really easy to learn. And as we often say at the very end, this game is all open information. There's absolutely nothing here that it needs to be kept secret, so you can always get help from someone else if you really don't understand something.
All right.
All right.
For 2 players, would you recommend?
I would. I think this is, I mean, even with the map not being the best, you can't do everything in this game.
Sure.
So for me, kind of having one quadrant, not eliminated, but reduced, means that for you and me, the other 3 become more competitive.
Yeah.
And so that's where we tend to focus our energy, is those other 3 quadrants.
Right.
And I find that really engaging.
Yeah, 2-player, it's enough space, but it's still tight enough to make decisions meaningful, and we still block each other.
Yeah, they're definitely...
You're like, why are you still on the level 3 of this resource? I'm like, because I needed that much resource. Well, I do too. I'm
It's like, I need 3 animals, but you're still there because it hasn't come around to face you to take it off.
Yeah.
Arg.
Yeah. So that was all neat. Accessibility.
I think it's going to be great. I think the hardest part, honestly, is going to be rotating the board.
Yes.
Maybe the neoprene mat isn't as helpful. I don't know. I haven't looked at any comments to see if the retail version without the neoprene mat is any easier or just as hard to rotate. I don't know. I think it's just one of those things, making a turntable that's not exactly a turntable. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, like maybe you've modified a giant roulette wheel.
Yeah.
You'd be golden.
Or you just get one of those turntables and put the thing on it. I think if you want to upscale your copy even more, just go get a turntable and put it on there.
Pretty big turntable, but
yeah,
that would be sweet.
that would be sweet. Okay then.
All right. Sarah?
Yes.
Do you think this is a great game for cheese lovers or dangerous for cheese lovers?
It might be both. Because cheese lovers are going to absolutely love it because like there's an insert in there that goes over different cheeses. The order cards show different cheeses, most I can't even pronounce, and it all makes me very hungry for cheese. That's the dangerous part.
Very dangerous.
Yep.
And why would you ever roll with just one when you can be
Rolling with 2?
If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, you can reach out to us on the various social media platforms at
Rolling with 2, that's TWO. We're on Blue Sky, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Discord, we have a channel on Tabletop Express. Check the show notes for the invite link.
If you have time, check out the other content Nanaman has found for you, because remember, he's rolling with you.